So I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We're going to get started. There may be other people who are going to be joining us. Some administrative matters behind the scenes is my colleague Winston, who's going to be helping us with the Q&A. So you don't have to wait at any point for you to ask any questions that you may have. So feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A, and Winston will be able to answer them hopefully behind the scenes. And then at one point we may stop and open it up for general questions from the audience, and you'll have the opportunity to be unmuted and ask your questions. So this presentation is meant for employers, particularly executives or folks in HR or other relevant roles that are working at nonprofits or government employers. So it's called Helping Nonprofit and Government Employees Achieve Public Service Loan Forgiveness. This is being done in partnership with the Education Debt Consumer Assistance Program. My name is Carolina Rodriguez, and I'm the director of that program. And the Student Borrower Protection Center, Winston Berkman Green is representing SBPC. Winston, I don't know if you want to say a few words.
Yeah, no, thank you, Carolina. Again, my name is Winston with the Student Borrower Protection Center. We're a national policy nonprofit that does state and federal work around student loan debt, and are excited to tell you all with Carolina more about the current but time-limited opportunity to do student debt cancellation for public service workers. So thanks for joining.
Okay, so here's the agenda for today's presentation, and it's going to be a relatively brief presentation. There's going to be a few FAQs, which I'll talk about, but you're going to have those as a resource. So on the agenda, we're going to talk briefly about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program overall and what the waiver relief means. We'll talk about the challenge, and the challenge is really an upcoming deadline. And we're really going to focus about your role as an employer. How can you help your employees obtain for student loan forgiveness or cancellation through this program? And then, as I mentioned at the end, there's going to be a few FAQs that you're going to have an opportunity to review. You will get a copy of this presentation, and in fact, we're going to drop the link of this presentation in the chat for you. And then at the end, I basically have one page of resources with hyperlinks to the most useful things that I think you're going to need for purposes of this. So about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and waiver relief, I'm just covering basics. When I say basics, it's a big picture overview. So the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was created in 2007 with the understanding that we needed individuals to work in the public sector, that is nonprofit government sector, and that a higher education degree was required in order to fulfill these very critical jobs or roles. And so the federal government knew at that time that student debt was an issue, and that in order to incentivize public sector employees to work in that area, that we needed to provide some student debt relief. As a result, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was created, and again, it went into effect in 2007. But for the past few years, it was fraught with a lot of issues, which I'll talk about. And the big thing about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is that individuals who have federal student loans can get their entire remaining loan balance forgiven after they meet some requirements, mainly make 120 or 10 years worth of payments and work during that time period. And so at the end of that time, arguably at the end of those 10 years, any remaining balance on federal student loans would get forgiven, and that forgiven amount would not be taxable, and it's in fact not taxable, which is very good because the last thing you want is someone to get 100 grand or 200,000 forgiven and only to be subject to income taxes. And this is at no cost to the employer. This is a federal program that is available to anyone across the United States who meets the program eligibility requirements. Another big thing about the program is that qualifying payments are not cumulatively. So are cumulative, they do not have to be consecutive. So arguably someone can go work in the private sector, come back to the nonprofit government sector and pick up where they left off. So they don't have to work 10 years consecutively in order to qualify for the program, which is another great thing because you want to make sure that you have a diverse employee staff because that just benefits us all. So people do not have to feel like they're just stuck in the nonprofit sector. They could in fact go out into the private and come back. You technically don't enroll in the program, but there is one simple form which you're going to be familiar with as an employer that you would need to complete in order to track your progress and eventually apply for forgiveness. And again, we'll talk about that specific form. So Pslf until recently had a 99% rejection rate, and there are some reasons behind that. Part of the reason is that the program went into effect in 2007, but no one really was proactive in implementing the program. So there was no way for people to track their payments. There was a lot of misunderstanding in terms of the type of loans that qualify for the program. So fast forward from 2007, 10 years later, people were applying and they were just being rejected left and right because again, they didn't have the right type of loans, didn't have the right type of repayment plan, and it was just an administrative mess, to say the least. So back in 2021, the current administration decided to do something about it. And for a limited time period up until October 31st, they're basically waiving key program requirements and saying, as long as you can show two things, as long as you can show that you were in repayment and you were working full-time for a qualifying employer, we'll give you credit. And if you've already reached the 120 qualifying payments, you're going to see your debt forgiven. But if you haven't reached the 120, then you will be that much closer to forgiveness, and then you can continue accumulating payments moving forward. So that means that there are thousands of nonprofit and government employees who are either eligible for full forgiveness now or are that much closer to reaching forgiveness, which is really important. So what is considered a qualifying employer? Because I think this is critical, right? So again, in order to qualify for public service loan forgiveness and to benefit from the more lenient rules, you still need to show that you were working full-time for a qualifying employer. In general, think about your nonprofits, 501c3s. And when it comes to government employment, it doesn't matter whether it's federal, state, or local or tribal. And that includes schools and universities and hospitals. Most hospitals in New York State are nonprofits. Peace Corp and AmeriCorps volunteer work also counts. Even if nonprofits are not 501c3, if they're still nonprofits, they may also be counted for purposes of the program. So if you as an employer are not sure for any reason, there is this really nice tool. It's the employer Pslf search tool that you can go ahead and search and confirm that that your employer qualifies for purposes of Pslf. Now, what is considered full-time employment? And this is really important. It's the higher or greater of either of the following. Either what you as an employer consider full-time, right? So if your full-time is 35 hours per week, then that's the full-time. If someone is working part-time, they would need to average 30 hours per week, but both, or at least two or more of those qualifying employers who make up those 30 hours, again, have to be the nonprofit government employers. So in other words, if someone works 15 hours at a nonprofit, but 15 hours at their local pharmacy, and the pharmacy is not a nonprofit, then they would not meet the 30 hours on average per week, because both employers have to be qualifying employers, again, nonprofit government. So what is the challenge? The challenge really is the deadline. In order for people to benefit from the latest relief and the more flexible rules, they need to be proactive and take action by October 31st, 2022. And that is really around the corner when you consider we're already mid-August and September is going to fly by, and then October is here, right? So in case you forget that deadline, is Halloween. That's the deadline we're working towards. Again, let me say it, people really have only until October 31st to benefit from the more generous rules and get what basically means retroactive coverage if needed for their qualifying payments. I'm not going to go too much into the details of the nitty-gritty of the program and waiver, in part because it's a lot to cover, and there's a lot of resources that I'm going to provide at the end for you to dive deeper if that is of interest. The problem is that a lot of public service employees are not aware of the program in general, and they're definitely not aware of the temporary waiver opportunity. And people who may even be aware of the program, they feel like so disheartened by the fact that this program has been fraught with issues. So many people we're encountering are really skeptical about the original program in itself, much less trying to understand the waiver opportunity. So, after the deadline, after October 31st, it's not that PSLF as a program goes away, is that it's just that we revert to the original program rules. And if people don't apply and get their paperwork in, they may miss out on actual forgiveness or getting that much closer to forgiveness. What is the potential impact across the US? It is estimated that over 9 million public service employees would be eligible for PSLF. And in New York State, over 524,000 may be eligible for forgiveness. Again, it doesn't mean that they're eligible for full forgiveness right now. It means that they would be eligible for the program and either get forgiveness now or in the near future. So what is really your role? It's very simple. We're asking you to spread awareness and certify employment. And spreading awareness is really important, again, because you are trusted messengers, right? I could do an entire ad campaign and some people may look into it, but there's nothing like information coming from your own employer that has the best interest in mind of your employees. You are the most trusted messengers, and we're running against the clock in order to disseminate information about this unique opportunity. So we ask again that you spread the word, literally spread the word to your employees. And the second thing we're asking you is to obviously help them certify their employment by completing the PSLF form, and to do that on time and be aware of the October deadline. So here are some things that can help you spread awareness. And a big shout out to the Student Borrower Protection Center for working on this toolkit. We're basically giving you all the information that you probably need about PSLF, the waiver, and it's all in one website. Or web page, and you're going to have access to template letters that you can send out. And in all honesty, there's just so much information out there that I am sure you'll get the resources you need in order to spread awareness. And if you need anything specific, definitely reach out to us and we'll provide our contact information and we'll help you get that for you. So as I noted, you're going to have the link to this toolkit. You can explore it. This is a win-win, right? By disseminating information, by helping your employees get the information and help they need in order to potentially qualify for debt cancellation or forgiveness. It's a win for you in the sense that your employees are going to be grateful for that information, even if they're not done yet with the public service loan forgiveness. And it's a win for your employees because oftentimes we as employers are trying to figure out how do we increase salaries, and sometimes the budget doesn't allow for that. So this is a good indirect way for your employees to have more financial resources by eliminating this debt. Here's the one and only form that it's used to track progress towards PSLF and eventually apply for forgiveness once people have reached the 120. Just to clarify, you submit this form just to know how many qualifying payments you have. This is the second page of the form that really has to be completed by the employer. Employees have the option of generating this form through what is known as the PSLF help tool, that it's going to pre-populate most of the information. They're going to need the employer identification number. This is your IRS employer ID number, and their employment start and end dates if they have the end date. If not, they just need to mark that they're currently or still employed. So the key for you when you get this form is to make sure you review everything and the form is completed with a particular focus on section 4. So section 4 is the certification aspect of the form, where someone authorized in your office is going to be able to sign this form. Wet signatures are required. Unfortunately, electronic signatures are not accepted. And that person would type in or write in their name, their title, and contact information and date it. I can tell you that a good number of forms get rejected just because the official only signed and dated the form without completing the rest of the information. You want to make sure, again, that you help your employees by just going through the form, even if it's pre-populated, and making sure everything is completed, and then again, being able to sign off on it. I'm going to stop there to see if there's any questions before we move on, or Winston, if there's anything else that you want to add based on what we've covered so far.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. And there's no questions in the chat. Maybe in a moment we'll, encourage people to put them there, or we can invite folks to speak. The only thing I would just sort of say in summary of what Caroline has said is just taking a step back is just to sort of, summarize, like, this program already exists. Folks who do certain kind of jobs can qualify to get their federal student loans forgiven, and that eligibility runs through the employer, right? It doesn't matter what they do, it matters who they work for. So employers are really, really important stakeholders in this. And that the form Carolina just described is really just a very simple certification of the fact that someone worked for you presently or previously. It has no indication about whether their loans will get forgiven. The employer is not opining on the employee's, work quality or anything like that. It's not an assessment. It's just a simple fact that this person worked here and what date range and what was their status. But it's really critical, right? And so there is really this two-step of wanting to spread the word through employers, but also get employers to sort of lean into this opportunity for a zero budget, but very impactful benefit for their employees. And since this might be foreign to a lot of folks, wanting to sort of lower the temperature and really assure people that it's a very straightforward administrative process, this form, and it looks like a bunch of little boxes, but most of them don't have to get filled out, but it's a really amazing opportunity. So I just wanted to sort of underscore that point that Caroline had already made, because we think it's something that is really a win-win for employers and employees.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to some of the most frequently asked questions. I'm tempted to not go through all of them, but we'll see if people don't have questions, I might continue on. These are some of the most common FAQs we get. Who's a qualifying employer? We've already talked about that. Think about your 501c3's nonprofit, and again, any government employer, whether federal, state, or local. Do I need to know the Pslf program requirements to know my employees? We want to say no, not necessarily, but it cannot hurt, right? Like if you're going to be in HR, or this is your role, or you're an executive director or someone in leadership, it does not hurt for you to better understand the program. But technically you don't have to, because you'll be able to refer your employees to other great and amazing resources for them to learn about the program. And as Winston said, we're not requiring, or no one is asking you to look into the program eligibility, the outcomes of that. Your employees are responsible for making sure that they meet the program requirements and that they do any follow-up. Your key role is to complete that form and, again, disseminate information about the program, because you are trusted sources of information. Who can sign the Pslf form? This has come up quite a bit recently, and it's really anyone who's authorized in your agency. Arguably, that person is going to need to have access to employee records. So we always say someone in HR, but again, it's anyone who has access to those records and it's authorized to sign off on that. And you're just verifying the employment. Again, you're not verifying whether they're eligible or not. You actually cannot even do that on that form. Does the employee position matter or title? It does not. So that's really a good thing, because someone could be working at a university and they could be doing administrative office work, and they would qualify as long as the employer identification number is deemed a qualifying employer, meaning they're going to base it based on the employment ID number in order to determine whether the employer qualifies. So we're telling people you need to look at your W-2 just to verify your employer qualifies. Again, generally, if you know you're a nonprofit, you're going to be a qualifying employer. Do you have to submit the form on behalf of your employees? No, it is really up to you. I always say you must return a copy of the form, the completed form, back to your employees, because we generally recommend employees to submit that form on their own and for them to keep further records. So if you are going above and submitting it on behalf of your employees, go ahead and do that. But again, I really recommend that you give a copy of that completed form to your employee for them to follow up. We've already talked about this. Do I need to determine whether my employees qualify for PSLF or forgiveness? The answer is no. If you end up submitting the form, well, the question really is there an online portal to submit the form? And the answer is no for employers, and there is none. For some employees who have the right servicer, and at this point is Mohila, they can upload that form on their own, but in general, they can also mail it or fax it to Mohila. Mohila is the student loan servicer, literally contracted by the U.S. Department of Education to manage the public service loan forgiveness program. Until recently, and there's a little bit of overlap, Fed Loan was the servicer managing the program, but they're exiting the market and turning over their portfolio to Mohila. So chances are moving forward, most borrowers are going to be interacting with Mohila to determine their eligibility for the program. Why are forms rejected? Again, I already mentioned one of the key things that happens is people forget to complete section 4, or the information is not legible. So as an employer, you want to make sure that page 2 of the form is completed and that there is a signature. It doesn't have to be an original signature per se, so meaning you can get the form, you sign it like with a wet signature, and then you just send a copy back to the employee. So the employee doesn't have to submit the original signed document. A copy of a wet signature of the form completed will be more than enough. How often should employees be completing the form? We recommend at least every year and upon employment departure. I think this is just in general good policy and practice as an employer. If you know someone is leaving your job and they have been pursuing PSLF and submitting this form, it may serve you well to give them a completed form when they leave, just to make sure that they have the information they're going to need in order to continue pursuing the program. How long does it take to process forms once submitted? The program and the waiver relief has had a huge impact in terms of the number of forms being submitted, and it is taking the servicer, whether it's Fed Loan or Mohila and the Department of Education, a long time, several months, to get back to borrowers. But once the form is submitted, it's a bit of a waiting game. We do recommend that borrowers receive an acknowledgement that the servicer got the form and keep that as a receipt or as proof that they submitted it. But it's going to be quite a bit of a waiting game for people to hear back on these forms. Sometimes the forms get processed once at a time, and so people may get different notices with a different payment count and an updated payment count as those forms get processed. What happens if the form is completed incorrectly? One, we would hope that the servicer lets you know if you completed any employer section wrong. Usually they'll contact you and let you know that there's an issue, and you can reach back out to them to correct it either over the phone. The worst case scenario is you just redo the form and give it back to the employee and it gets resubmitted. So not a big deal. The only big deal is the October 31st deadline, because we want to make sure that we have like an accurately submitted form by then, if that's possible. What happens after the October 31st deadline? Again, it's not the program ends, it's just that we're back to the more stringent PSLF rules. From an employer perspective, your function continues to be the same, aside from spreading awareness about the program beyond the waiver. You just continue to complete those employment certification forms. Here are the resources. I kept the resources to a limited number because there's just a lot of information out there, but I think these are the top resources that you would need to get yourself started in this PSLF journey and helping employees. The first one is a direct link to the PSLF program and waiver, and that is directly through studenta.gov. The second link is the employer search tool. When in doubt, you or your employees can search whether their current or former employment qualifies for purposes of the public service loan forgiveness program. I've also included there the PSLF employment certification form in PDF. So if for any reason your employees cannot generate the form, or you made a mistake on the form and you need to redo it, you can access the form in PDF file and complete it. So you don't have to necessarily wait for the employee to submit another form for you to fill it out. You can go ahead and do it yourself. For employees, I am linking to the Student Borrower Protection Center step-by-step guide. Again, this is a website that it's going to guide employees through the process of PSLF, literally step by step. And then at the end, we do have the PSLF help tool, which employees would use to generate the form. These are very basic resources, but they're basic in the sense that these are the most critical resources. And that is the end of our presentation. I am going to see if there's any questions, and I'll be happy to enter my contact information in case you have more questions. This is a good sized group where I'm comfortable opening the gateway to communication for this group. Winston, any questions or anything else? And then we can open it up for questions. So feel free to raise your virtual hand and we will unmute you.
Yeah, definitely. I encourage any questions. I'll also put my contact information. And Carolina has listed out all these resources. So I just want to emphasize that there are plenty of resources, and we are among them to help individual borrowers navigate their loans. And so an employer doesn't feel the need, shouldn't feel the need to have to do that. And I would hate for sort of a perfect becoming the enemy of the good in terms of an employer waiting or hesitating to reach out and share this opportunity with their employees because they're not sure if they can do loan counseling, right? Like, employer has to do loan counseling. All that would be helpful at a minimum is just sharing this opportunity that it exists and then signing folks' forms when they approach with the forms. And I'll add mine to the chat, and it looks like we have one person with their hand up. So I'm going to click the allow to talk button, and hopefully this works.
Hello.
Okay. Yes. Hi.
Hi. I wanted to know if once you submit the form before the deadline, if there are errors and an employer has to resubmit the form, are they on record as having met the October 31 deadline and not penalized for updating the form after the fact?
So I can take a stab at that question. That is our assumption, that if you submitted it and the employee submitted it, you should be good, because correcting the form is just that, right? Like, you're correcting the form. So that is my understanding, Winston. I don't know if you have any other understanding in terms of the deadline.
I would just add, and it's a great question, and part of, I think, our slight uncertainty is that up until, frankly, still currently, there is no formal appeals process for this. And that was a huge problem that got a lot of press about 2 years ago. And they're building one out now, right? So they're doing that, and that's great. And that appeals process is meant specifically to deal with incorrect rejections, right? And so as long as someone gets past the post by the deadline, I'm pretty confident that that there's a strong argument that they should be honored through that appeals process and otherwise. So I think that should be all of our goal, is get something in. Always, we should all make our best good faith effort to get something in that's accurate. But if they're going to ding it or reject it on some improper grounds, borrowers should be in a good position to still be honored for the waiver benefits.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
And feel free to put them in the Q&A feature as well if you're more comfortable doing it that way.
Okay, so I hope this was useful. Obviously, our intent is to spread awareness and make sure that as many people apply and benefit. It's really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I do this work. Winston has been doing this work probably for longer than I have. And it is utmost rewarding to be able to see people get rid of their student loan debt. It is truly life-changing. And this is like the one thing that you can really help your employees, and there's no fiscal cost to your agency. There may be an administrative aspect to it, but you would be doing it regardless. And so we really appreciate your time. We provided our contact information in the chat. Please reach out. We are continuing to do employer presentations, but it's a learning experience for us as well in terms of figuring out how do we support employers to spread awareness, again, because at the end of the day, you're probably more effective because you're trusted messengers. So unless there's any last questions, I'm just going to turn it over to Winston for any final remarks. And
I have one more question.
sure.
Please.
So is your contact information specifically for employers? Because I work for City University of New York. We have 28 campuses. Each one has its own benefits and HR office. And so I was going to share your contact information with them if I could. Is that something that they should not give out to employees? Are you a resource for employers, or is there a resource for employees also?
So we are lucky enough that in New York, I'm going to type in and I can follow up with you. I feel like I've provided some of our information already, but in New York, we have the program called EdCap, which is really meant for borrowers. And I'm going to type in, it's the same webpage you probably used to register for the webinar. But I can follow up and provide kind of like a little blurb that has our EdCap contact information. If you have like employer questions, feel free to reach out to me or Winston, and I think we should be okay if you share with like the different campuses. But again, that would be for the employer side. For borrowers, it would be the edcapny.org information, which again, I'm happy to send. I'll send a follow-up email to everyone with a copy of the recording and PowerPoint, just in case you didn't get it. And I can be more specific there as well.
Yeah. And I'll say, just because you're from CUNY, we did have a chance to speak with one of your colleagues from CUNY a few weeks ago, Stephen Snyder. So if you're talking with colleagues, that may come up. And similarly, although Carolina works at EdCap, and that is explicitly has a direct borrower assistance function, my organization is just a very small team and we work across the country. So feel free to share my email address with your colleagues at the different campuses, but it's probably not as useful for them to pass it on to individual employees because we won't have the bandwidth to get back to them. But any of the resources on the slide here, I think Carolina would probably agree, 95% of people, I'm making that up, but like extremely high percent of people will have fairly straightforward Pslf experiences. And so the existing online tutorials and step-by-step guides are going to be sufficient for most people. There will certainly be individuals who want further assistance or some who have complicated cases who need further assistance. But we generally try to direct individual employees and borrowers to some of those existing resources that are on the screen in front of you, particularly the forgivemystudentdebt.org, and have found that is, for the vast majority of people, that is a really helpful way to do their process without needing one-on-one coaching. Great. The only other thing I was going to say as my final note is, really, if you have follow-up questions, reach out to Caroline and me, but also keep in mind that we have roughly 2 months until this waiver ends, and there is a logistical, it takes time, not a ton of time, but it does take time to process each of these forms for your office. So the sooner employees can be made aware of this, the longer everyone has to do this paperwork. And if it becomes a logistical impossibility for some reason, I encourage you to reach back out to Caroline and me, both because we are continuing to advocate for this deadline to be extended to the federal government. And so being able to reiterate to the federal government that major employers and the exact people that this program is meant to benefit, didn't get the message in time and so aren't able to meet this deadline. That's a helpful story to tell, but also we can brainstorm with you ways to alleviate that burden. For instance, there's no requirement that a specific HR person, for example, sign these forms. There is some flexibility in how they can be distributed and dispersed for certification across an organization. So if that is becoming a logistical hurdle for you, reach back out and Caroline and I can talk through your options.
Okay, so with that, again, thank you so much for joining us, and we're here to support you. And I am sure your employees are really going to appreciate just the information and effort you're doing. So thank you so much. And thank you to Winston. We appreciate you attending.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.